Good morning, everybody. And you're probably wondering, what is a telecoms guy doing talking about an infrastructure like SmartOcean and this topic. A little point about cranes and maritime history. One other important point to recognize about this physical location is that right running outside this building is a fiber optic cable going across the Atlantic seabed. And the other end of that fiber optic cable is the NASDAQ stock exchange. So when you're thinking about the opportunities that this industry, that ICT, have in front of it, a location such as this is the perfect location for innovation, for job creation as a true digital hub. And what I'm going to just come across right now is I'll go through a brief background of Magnet, who we are, and outline what we see, which is at the forefront of big data, particularly because we're dealing with a lot of the largest ICT companies in the world in transferring their data across the Atlantic and to Asia Pacific. Is what are we seeing as trends, but more importantly, what do I see as opportunities for this forum here from a development, from an R&D, from an investment perspective? How can you help us? So just the big data, I call that the IP tsunami. I'm going to stand down off the stage. There's the IP tsunami. I talked about this in 2008. It was the wave of and the growth in IP traffic, internet traffic. And I've worked in storage industries, worked for companies like Sun Microsystems, Network Appliance, and I've seen the explosion of data consumption. More recently, in years gone by, I worked at Yahoo, and now working at this company called Magnet Networks. And Magnet Networks, the relevant point for this organization is it's part of a global investment firm, backed by a global investment firm with multiple telecoms assets. And what you see up in front of you is a map very familiar to all of you, but they are subsea cables. None of it comes out too well on the screen, but we have subsea cables going across the Atlantic that are owned by our organization. They have approximately 130 seabed amplifiers in them that capture all sorts of data. That data and the use of that data we've not managed to exploit at this point in time. But you have two 5,500 mile long cables, one of which passes by this building. Literally the road outside there is where the cable goes off, and it goes offshore, and the other end of it is Lower Manhattan. So think about that in terms of the context of what this industry can do, how you can leverage that asset. Another line that's one of the many lines on there is we're just about to commence building a new transatlantic fiber build from New Jersey to Somerset. And one of the challenges in building that asset is you need to find the straightest line between New Jersey and Somerset, which involves very intensive seabed mapping. Because the last thing you want to do is add miles onto the route of the cable. Why? Because the speed of light, you want to get your signal from London or Dublin to the New York Stock Exchange as fast as you can. And that's not the only reason, but there's certainly an opportunity as you look at that and you see the infrastructure going into Asia Pacific. What can a forum such as this leverage off that asset? Big data, very simple data points. It's talked about, it's been in the press a lot, so just picking out some spots. A terabyte of data, 300 hours of data of video. The National Center for Supercomputers in North America, they have one system which is 500 petabytes. These are all big numbers, yottabytes, petabytes, and there is a relevance to all this story. Where is this data coming from? The Facebooks of the world. Facebook ingests about 500 terabytes of data a day. So if you go back to the stats in terms of the volume of data transiting these networks and the power consumption to actually drive these networks and data centers is just enormous and growing exponentially. I think Amazon are adding 8 kilowatts of data center space pretty much every month and a half at this point in time. Enormous growth. One of the ones relevant for this audience, and I suspect many of you are familiar, is the Marine Explorer website, which I'm logged onto. And me as a non-marine observer or scientist, I'm able to access this wealth of information in the cloud. All of these sensors, I don't know if any of you are actually logged onto it, but I just log onto it through my LinkedIn account, and I can go to any buoy across the Pacific or Atlantic and look at the data points. I can go to some of the data here and pick in a particular buoy that has 1.2 billion data points on it. Masses of easily accessible data that needs to be accessed, stored, computed, analyzed. How can that data be shared across the ICT industry? How can I use that data? Is it for marine research? Is it for pharmaceutical research? But there is clearly a wealth and an explosion of data. And when I talk about the IP tsunami, this is the type of thing that is driving that tsunami. Another little example, and it's relevant just to the on-land scenario. Many of you are familiar with the Minority Report movie, the Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report. In London 3 weeks ago, we switched on a version of Minority Report in a shopping centre. And a little example is Brent Council in London is the world's cleanest, greenest council office, just opened at the end of September. No employees have paper. They all have an iPad. Any paper coming into that building is scanned, and it is sent via soft copy to your email account or in the cloud. There is no paper amongst 2,500 employees. First time it's happened in the world. You go across to the shopping centre that opened 2 weeks ago, and as you drive into the car park, the fibre optic cable runs to the car park barrier. That car park barrier recognises the number plate and knows what type of car you're driving, goes back to the DVLA, knows your socio-demographic background, and as you log on to the shopping centre Wi-Fi, I can serve you ads specific to you because I know what social grouping you come from. I know what shop you've been in. I know where you are in the store. Think of all that data and how you process that data. In the local council offices, you actually deal with a holographic receptionist who guides you to the various floors. This is real. It is happening now. So think about the context of the amount of data you're now generating about footfall, what you bought, what car you drive, when you shop, why you shop, even which pattern you shop through the shopping centre. And the types of stores that are in here, by the way, is Marks and Spencer's, Nike, all of these kind of stores. Give you a sense of scale. So people wonder, why do you have all these servers in a Boeing jet? You know, a Boeing jet engine, a single jet engine, generates 20 terabytes of data per hour. And people have asked me, why do you have all this server infrastructure now in the Dreamliner and all these modern aircraft? The Large Hadron Collider, 1 petabyte of data per second. And the square kilometre array, which is yet to go live, that will generate an exabyte of data per day. That's just beyond anything we do at this point in time, and that's meant to go live next year. So, having probably just given you a bit of a brain dump of numbers and big numbers, how can you help? And what are some of the ideas? What I'm here today is trying to spur some ideas about how this organization, you people in this room, can possibly help my industry. So the obvious one, when I think about it, is in the power space, which is data center growth, powering the broadband infrastructure. What can this organization do? What are the ideas? And one of the ideas I've discussed and was chatting with Paul earlier on is think of this physical location, look out that window, think of the real estate sitting idle here, think of the fiber asset running past this building. Why isn't this a digital hub? Why isn't this a true data center hotbed powered by marine power, tidal power, wind power, biopower? What is it that you could do in this physical location with all of this resource at your disposal? And I'm aware when I talk to funders and investors, which is relevant again for this community, is there's a huge appetite in the investment community in London and the US to invest in clean and green renewable power. Firms like Carlyle, one of the largest private equity firms in the world, are actively hunting for investment opportunities. They have a $500 million fund that they have yet to find homes for. They're looking, actively hunting for opportunities to invest in renewable sectors, marine, on land, etc. So this is a real fact. And in February of this year in London, I met a number of investors who said, Mark, there's a wall of money looking to invest, and we're struggling to find homes to invest. The types of power projects, I mean, when you talk about powering data centers, the biggest cost of all this data is clearly cooling data centers. And when you have projects like NASA's Omega project, using sort of best I can describe is biofuel, using algae and effluent from cities. Think about this location again. You have sewage, you have effluent coming out of this city. How could you leverage those type of projects to generate power, to have a data center powered outside here, linked into the cable going to the NASDAQ, to use this as a trading hub for Europe, or a content hub, or a hub for Netflix's content delivery to Europe? Why not? You look at what was launched a few weeks back in Australia was another of these wave power test beds. Why can't you have a wave power dedicating its power generation to a data center? I think there's a project outside one of the companies, name escapes me, who are launching a project, I think, for wave or tidal power shortly off the north coast. Why couldn't that actually be linked into an array of data centers in Northern Ireland? Other topics of opportunity is this marine domain awareness issue, which is with all of the sensors and deployed sensors, buoys and UAVs, you also have the permanent installation of the seabed cables. How can they be utilized? And bear in mind, these cables are maintained typically by a fleet of 4 ships on standby who have the submarines who go down and maintain the cables. And one of the best customer calls we get is when somebody's broadband at home goes down and the explanation you want to give them was a mid-Atlantic volcano damaged the cable. But you can't really explain that because nobody would believe you. So when your broadband slows down at home, no one thinks of plate tectonics or volcanoes. They just think that somebody's pulled a power plug somewhere. But when you look at this in terms of what does the asset that we sit on, what does it enable in terms of fisheries protection, what of piracy? And I'm not just talking about the Irish and from the Canary Islands perspective. When you have this infrastructure there, how do you integrate the data as sensors? And this is all about big data and poses challenges from an academic standpoint as how can we make best use of this data, predictive modeling, even pharmaceutical research. If there's extreme weather events out in the ocean, do you always see that 1 month later everybody catches the flu in Sweden? Don't know. But all of that data exists to model. You recognize in the top left-hand corner, just looks like a pretty nondescript barge. You'll probably agree being towed into position. The photograph in the bottom left-hand corner is yesterday in San Francisco Bay, and that's a data center. That's a Google. That's a Google barge. Right? Now we have one of the things we've been looking at in London, and the right-hand side is one of the developments we're doing is in Greenwich Peninsula. And one of the challenges in building data centers is the cost of land, the cost of power. And I was just shooting the breeze with Paul earlier on and saying, give me a barge that I can moor out here, that embedded in the bottom of this barge is a wave power device, something that can generate wave or tidal power. This barge is permanently fixed out here in one of the jetties. But this is a manifestation of what's happening. This is a barge with containers stacked on top of it, and it is one of the ideas we've been looking at for London. Is real estate in London is very expensive. What if I had a barge with embedded capabilities for wave and tidal power? And so I effectively had a self-sustaining data center. I could use water for cooling, and I could use tidal power to support the servers in there, which then has ramifications of how do I deal with salinity in the air, because it damages the servers. How do I deal with corrosion on the barge? So you can see all the offshoots is this is becoming real. And the ramifications, as I went around looking at all the posters, is people talking about, looking at sensors to detect corrosion. Well, this becomes now a relevant story because you don't want your barge corroding and sinking with all of your wonderful data stored on it. In terms of sensor availability, I've talked about it, probably touched on it, so I'll just skip through quickly. But when you have two 5,500 mile long cables, what can you do? As faults develop, these are already embedded cables sitting on the seabed, going across. They land in Halifax and go down through Boston into Manhattan. But faults occur. So when those faults occur, we send out a ship and it goes down and picks the cable up off the seabed, 3 miles down, 4 miles down. But what can you now, with this industry here, attach to that cable? That could be a new sensor array across a permanent fixture across the Atlantic seabed. Because there are two cables. One goes northbound, and then it goes south around Wexford off to the US. And then the new cables are going in, as I said, from New Jersey to Somerset. So what can you embed, both in existing infrastructure and new infrastructure, that could facilitate big data analytics? And the bottom point I'm talking about is if you combine marine data and big data, like the Marine Explorer, and you have an app, and we develop apps and we push them out there, why can't you combine all of that data from on land and marine into this cloud? And what does it do in terms of predictive modeling around medical research? So asthma attacks increase because salinity in the air increases at a particular point in time. Does it? I don't know. I'm simply trying to stimulate the ideas that it may kind of sort of create this law of unintended consequences. By combining all of this data, it creates something else. These buildings in common, I suppose this is just the visual representation of the opportunity I see for this physical site when you think about it, is two cables. You are linked right now outside this building to North America. And when I take people into the cable landing station in Dublin and say, you see that cable? And they touch it and I say, the other end of that is Manhattan. It kind of blows people away that you physically have cables going along the seabed. And people never think, and their broadband goes slow at home, that this physically goes across North America. And these cables, by the way, carry all of the internet traffic off the island to North America. So as from a digital protection, marine domain protection perspective, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the room, but the only country in the world that does not define fibre as a critical national asset is the Republic of Ireland. So when we talk to fisheries people, we have to talk nicely. There is no mandated legislation around protecting the critical national asset that is fibre off this island, which is a big issue for us. People trawling across the fibre asset. But think about the opportunity that this presents, this asset presents, because it does enable Ireland as the island of, I talk about here, a digital hub for globally traded services. And I suppose that's what I end up at, which is, if I think about the big idea for Belfast, given that we're here today, is the Belfast Ideas Generator. You have all of this space out here. You have the physical connectivity. You have the opportunities through marine power generation, through biofuel from effluent treatment out at sea. The NASA Omega project, as an example, is how can they be harnessed through this phrase that you're familiar with, the triple helix of government, industry, and academia. By pulling all of those together, how could you make this an exemplar location and an exemplar smart city? The technology is there. It's being deployed. The explosion of data is clear for all to see. We see it massively. We are seeing, and actually just a little data point for you, consumers are downloading more data per day than businesses are. So the acceleration has just gone through the roof in terms of how consumers can take data on board. So the only certainty is that growth in data and storage is going north at a rapid rate and is expected to grow by between 3 and 5 times over the next 3 to 4 years. So the demand for power, for renewable power, for data centers is only going to grow. And I think pretty much that's it. So I reach out to you guys and say, look, we have a challenge in terms of the explosion of growth. How can this industry, this forum, work with us to help that? And how can we help you, for example, with the existing infrastructure we have deployed? Because I think there are certainly tremendous opportunities for collaboration between the ICT industry and, should we say, if I define just the marine industry itself. And that's it. All right.
Thank you. Some very interesting thoughts there. I made a point yesterday about the fact that we have cables transiting the whole seafloor of the whole planet, but they're completely insulated from the environment around them. They're designed not to be interfered with in any way by the environment around them.
Sure.
So what's the feasibility from your perspective of that industry working with governments who license and permit the landfall and if you like, foreshore for those facilities to work with the challenge of really getting a handle on that area? And as you say, I mean, they cross over the wall of fire on the seafloor where all the volcanic and tectonic activity is happening. They could make an enormous contribution. And even without an additional cable being attached, which would be a sensor cable, is there scope now for, as you say, there's 4 ships monitoring for localized, buoyed systems that would be proximate to critical points, sensitive points, break points, and areas where you've had problems. They could make very significant, immediate, short-term contributions.
Sure. So I think the easiest answer is there's an appetite on the new build. So when you're deploying a new infrastructure, that's the easiest point to embed that sensor array as the cable is being laid. And just to give you an example, the driver of that new cable, Merrill Lynch, in days gone by, and other banks have said that having a faster broadband cable to North America improved their annual profits in a year by 147 million, just by having a faster connection. So there is an appetite to deploy new fibers, right? So I think the easiest path of least resistance is as new infrastructure is deployed to embed it. The opportunity then with established infrastructure is as repairs are required, there are 130 amplifiers on the seabed that sort of basically amplify the laser, the photonics that are going across that network. And as they're pulled up off the seabed, the question is what can then be attached to them. And I think one of the challenges is we've all tended to operate in a silo. So we do ICT communications, you guys do marine research as an example. And what I'm saying here today is that opportunity is to reach out and start that collaboration of that triple helix, because I don't think those discussions have really evolved. But then I don't think people have fully understood what's coming down the track at us in terms of not what I use as data, but I think about my 4.5-year-old and my 15-year-old and how they interact with ICT. You know, it's what we need to build for the next 10 years, and that's a scary one, how they operate. You know, I still have my 4.5-year-old who opens a magazine and drags his finger across the picture, because that's how he operates on the tablet. So the answer to your question is openness in terms of new build, conservatism with established infrastructure would be the best way to define that.